G'day mates, it's Busta here, and before this video begins, I would like to give Hunter Killer a huge shout out for sponsoring this video. So, the days are getting shorter and darker, and nothing seems more fitting than a horror story, right? And that's why I'm so excited to tell you guys about Hunter Killer's new Blair Witch game. As someone who has played their games before and is also a huge fan of board games in general, I can vouch for the Hunter Killer games being a lot of fun. From getting the box in the mail and trying to resist the urge to peek just prior to game night, to sifting through all of the evidence, solving puzzles, examining clues, and that sweet feeling of finally making a breakthrough. I can honestly say that playing these games with my partner over a bottle of wine has been one of the best experiences in gaming that I've had, and I've really looked forward to it every time. And I also really liked the recent one that I played called Blair Witch. The artwork for this one was particularly nice and well crafted, which I really appreciated because I'm a bit of a sucker for a good aesthetic. But I also really love the immersion of this particular series, with its feeling of like being put in a show that I can touch and feel almost. And with each delivery, you'll piece together the history of the Blair Witch by sifting through cryptic documents, discovering audio recordings, and solving some really unsettling puzzles. And the story begins with Rosemary Kent, a woman who lives on the edge of the infamous Black Hills forest, and she needs your help to find her missing son. To reunite the Kent family, you must investigate the mysterious forest yourself. Will you face down the horror of the Blair Witch and those who serve her, or is there something more to it? Either way, with this Blair Witch experience, you can have more fun at home for less than a price of a few drinks, a meal at a decent restaurant, or even a movie. No babysitter required. Oh, and also, they have this great initiative with their games where a portion of the proceeds from every box goes to the Cold Case Foundation. It's an organization that helps real-life cold cases get solved, which, personally, I think is pretty neat. So, right now you can go to hunterkiller.com/BUSTA and use code BUSTA for 20% off your first box. Again, make sure to use code BUSTA for a 20% discount. Can you survive the curse of the Blair Witch? So I was in the army and I was here for basic training. Every night we took turns doing fire guard. It's basically where two soldiers rotate every hour to watch the door and make sure everybody stays in bed. There were 4 barracks bays. Ours, the female bay, was upstairs and across the hall from a male bay, but we used separate stairwells. So us females and the drill sergeants were the only ones using the center stairwell. The drill sergeants would come up to check on us periodically. The doors were heavy and pretty loud. We could clearly hear them when they went into the bay across the hall. So every now and then, we would hear footsteps come all the way up the stairs and stop. Neither of the doors would open, and we would never hear them go back down. We even heard objects rolling down the stairs at some points. You could hear them hitting every individual step as they went down. And man, it was creepy. After lights out too, everyone had to stay in bed, and we had to let the fire guard know if we were going up to go to the bathroom, and no showering was allowed after that time. But there were times though when we would hear people talking in the bathroom in the middle of the night, and sometimes hear the showers going too. So we would go to look because we all would get into trouble if anyone was up making noise, but there was never anybody in there. I should also mention too, the lights are motion sense, so we would walk in and the lights would turn on, meaning that a physical person hadn't been walking in there for at least a few minutes. Our beds were in rows, all lined up, and one night we all got woken up by a scream right next to our row of beds. All of us sat up at the same time, freaking out and looking at each other, but we couldn't figure out where it had come from. All of this happened in Fort Sill, but then there was Fort Pickett. So this was in 2009 during our annual summer training. We were in the field, which is basically like camping in tents. There was a large open field where the medical tent was, and then our personal tents were sort of back in the tree line. And there were a few nights where people were woken up by something shaking their tents, whispering their names, or even some vivid nightmares. Some even saw figures standing outside of their tents. Some people had dreams where they woke up only to be in another dream. I was with another sergeant in a two-person tent far off to the edge of the group, when one night I could have sworn that I heard footsteps all around our tent, almost circling it, as if a whole platoon was walking past us really slowly. But our medical area was so far away from all of the other training areas, and as far as I knew, no one was out training at 2 a.m. that day. Also, while this is not anything paranormal related, but the entire place was just infested with spiders like you wouldn't believe. When we first got there, we went into the woods to set up our sleeping tents, and within 5 minutes there were like 6 spiders crawling on my pant legs. It definitely was not my favorite annual training, that's for sure. Anyway, the Fort Indian Town Gap was the next one. My ex used to tell me while he was sleeping that he would always see a man or figures standing next to the bed or in the corners of the room. He often saw a man with a mustache, he would say, and I don't know who it could have been, but anyway, fast forward to another annual training. We had some free time one day, and most of us decided to go back and take naps in the barracks. The girl in the bunk next to me was asleep for about an hour when she woke up and asked me if she had been screaming. I said, "No, you didn't say anything the whole time. You were just sleeping." And she said that she just had a sleep paralysis and thought that she was awake. And in her awake dream, she was in the same barracks with all of us, but we were all staring at her. But the thing that got me was that she said that there was a man with a mustache standing next to my bunk. He was bent over and was the only person looking at me instead of her. Now, she's a complete skeptic, and I've never told her about what my ex saw too, so that definitely made my skin crawl. I've experienced paranormal things since I was a child. I've always been open and receptive to paranormal things, and maybe possibly to a fault even. You see, when I started dating my now husband, I would tell him all sorts of stories of things that I experienced through my childhood and even teenage years. He has always been fascinated by the paranormal, and my stories always intrigued him, but he never experienced anything himself until we moved in together. I've always been convinced that I had a clinger spirit that has attached to me somewhere in my life and just stayed along for the ride pretty much. We've lived in different locations and always experienced the same things at each home. It was never anything malicious, and I always joked that my Casper was just doing things to say hi and let me know that he's here. My husband just laughed it off because there was never really an issue and everything seemed harmless and playful. I mean, we've walked into our offices with our desk chairs spinning when nobody was in the room. We have smart TVs and they all rotate turning on in the middle of the night as if someone is trying to watch TV, scrolling through the apps to select Netflix or Hulu. I've also seen it just run through different HDMI options. Items that have specific locations, like keys, will end up in random places, like under the kitchen sink or in a sock drawer. But we shut our closet doors at night and we'll wake up with them wide open. Now, I can't sleep if there's even a sliver of light showing in my room. Pretty much any light will wake me up from a dead sleep. I wake up to the bathroom light switching on quite often, which requires me to get out of bed and turn it off so I can go back to sleep. My husband's computer powers on by itself too, and it's a bigger tower with a power button that takes a little effort to push. I guess you could say too that we've become used to those things. But lately, something else has started, and I think it's mimicking me. You see, lately when I'm downstairs and my husband is in his office upstairs, he'll walk to the landing of our stairwell and ask me if I just called his name. Usually if I need something or have a question for him, I'll just call his cell phone if I'm too lazy to run upstairs or if I'm in the middle of cooking and can't leave the stove or something. Even when I'm laying down in bed and he's on his computer in the same room, he'll pull off his headphones and ask me what I need. For a while I was thinking, Am I losing my mind? Am I actually saying something and not realizing it? On some occasions, too, he's even stopped gaming midstream to come and find me, aggravated that I'm calling him when I literally haven't said a word. Every time I tell him that I didn't say his name, and he gets this confused look like he's trying to read my face to see if I'm telling him the truth. But yesterday was definitely the turning point. I was laying in bed, just reading, and he threw a bottle of water on the bed next to me. I asked him why he brought me a bottle of water, and he said, "Do you not remember asking me for water?" I told him no, and pointed to a bottle of water on the nightstand that I brought to bed when I laid down, and he said, "You literally just yelled down for me to bring you cold water." I explained to him that I didn't say that though, because I had my cold water that I brought to bed with me. We both agreed that something really strange is happening here, because this has just started within the last month, and I don't know if this is my entity that has followed me just now becoming vocal, or if this is something new. We're both of sound mind, and neither of us have any sort of mental issues, that we're aware of anyway, that would have me speaking without knowing it, or him hearing things. But aside from extreme annoyance, is there a real cause for concern? What do you guys think? When I was younger, I used to be obsessed with ghosts and all sorts of haunting shows too. And I'd never particularly had a reason to believe that my house was haunted, but one day my brother came home claiming to have found $10 just out of nowhere. I'll never know for sure if he was just messing with me, but after curiosity got the better of me, I asked him where he really got the $10 from. Stupid me assumed maybe a friend. Perhaps he stole it from my parents' wallet. My parents never claimed to have been missing any money, however. Something they would definitely have voiced their distraught about if they had noticed that we'd been taking their cash. But the story he gave to me was that a young girl, about the age of 7, had followed him into the school bus that afternoon. He'd never met this girl, and had never seen her around at school, but she decided to sit in the seat in front of him. After riding the bus for a little while, she started to talk to him. Nobody else could see her, according to him, though, and other kids were giving him looks. Eventually, she handed him $10 with a note, and then subsequently got off the bus at the next stop. I immediately assumed that he was lying and laughed, of course. I asked him to show me the note, which he promptly pulled out from his room and passed me a tiny piece of paper. And a shiver ran down my spine as the note wasn't in his handwriting, but in the handwriting of what I could only assume to be a young child that read, "I'll help you, but only this time," which I believe was in response to the fact that my brother was begging my parents for a Zelda charm bracelet for months, which they refused to buy for him. Given that he had $10 now, though, he could just buy it himself, though. Of course, me being me was extremely intrigued by this, even if it did seem absurd. So I suggested that we make a makeshift Ouija board and see if we can contact anyone. So we wrote the alphabet on a piece of paper and grabbed a necklace to sort of hover above the DIY board. My brother was interested too, so he decided that it could be fun. Mind you, I was in 6th grade and he was in 4th at the time, so any sort of movement from the necklace caught our attention and we immediately thought that it was a ghost. After asking a few questions, though, the necklace began to move and shake in a way that it definitely wasn't us. Well, either my brother was really good at tricking me by slowly sliding the necklace across the board, or it was really something paranormal going on. We were able to get a name, though, Kate, after asking dumb things too, like, "Did you watch me complete the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time?" and getting a yes. Me and my brother decided to stop for the night after being a bit creeped out. But we'd never actually said goodbye before ending, though. Eventually, playing with the board would be a bit of a daily occurrence, really. We thought that we'd made a friend and truly believed that someone was talking to us. In fact, me and my brother decided to take things a step further and try to record something. So we got both of our tablets, placed them in front of our TV and hit record. and the first thing that I asked was, if someone's there, move something in the room. There was nothing. Okay, well, maybe the ghost is shy, so we decided to ask the same question, but this time we said that we'll leave the room to give it time. We went downstairs for 5 minutes, and when we got back upstairs, our tablets had both fallen to the floor and stopped recording. Maybe a coincidence? I mean, things fall, right? Especially when you're not careful about placing them, so we just sort of brushed that one off. But in December of the 6th grade, things got really weird. So I had started to hear voices in my head claiming that they were the ghost I was talking to while playing the Ouija board. I'd gotten so scared one night that I'd grabbed the Bible one of my religious friends had gifted me. I'm not religious by any means, and would sleep with it. Eventually, I told my mum that there was a ghost telling me scary things. I won't go into detail, as some of it was a little bit graphic, but she and my dad argued for a while about whether or not I was schizophrenic and if I should see a therapist. So, out of fear, I just decided that I would never tell them anything again. But I'd space out, often talking and having conversations with this thing I believed to be a ghost. Eventually, though, I just sort of forgot about the ghost and we would no longer talk. I'll never know what that voice was, if I was genuinely insane, if they were just intrusive thoughts, maybe. I don't know, but I was just glad for it to have stopped. Nothing necessarily paranormal has happened to me since, besides my TV turning on randomly in the middle of the night, or the feeling of someone sort of pushing my legs with some sort of unknown force every once in a while. I sum it up as just my imagination, though, playing tricks on me now these days. But I still do have this looming feeling that ever since I've played with that Ouija board, I have some sort of thing attached to me, following me. Not necessarily something bad or evil, but just a looming presence. I live in a house that is really huge and quite beautiful, but there's one problem with it. I'm often home alone, and our house has giant windows. So I'm a 23-year-old girl that is going to college nearby, and I live at home in order to afford school. My mum and stepdad have much more of a fun nightlife than I do, so they often go out of town. We live on a lake in a nice private lake neighborhood that is supposed to be monitored, but it often isn't due to lazy patrolmen. I have no self-defense because I'm so small, but in a neighboring town we have another house and I used to live in it. We had bought it so that I could have lived close to my college, as it's 3 streets away from it. But I had a stalker there that would leave gifts, footprints by the windows, and even some letters. I knew who she was. She had been a classmate at my college that was not accepting that I had no interest in dating girls. I filed a police report, and we have been called a few times because she had been seen entering our backyard, even though we haven't been back to that house in a while. I definitely know that gut feeling when I'm being watched, though, and it's helped me more than once. I'm back at our main house, though, now, due to that experience, and have been here for a few months now. It's 40 minutes away from our other house, and it's extremely difficult to find. We live on a road impossible to find on GPS, and only my closest friends have been out here to visit. But 2 weeks ago, I called the cops. So I'd been home alone, sitting upstairs, and I saw a figure in our yard. And then I heard doorknobs being rattled downstairs shortly after. After the cops showed up, 45 minutes later from getting lost, they found no one and just assumed that it was someone attempting to break in. Whoever it was, though, they definitely saw me because our windows are huge and located everywhere, and I sat right beside 3 windows that are at least 15 feet by 13 feet. This house was custom built for my mum and stepdad. Well, we have giant windows everywhere, including all of the bedrooms. Some of our windows are so big because they previously had belonged to an old church, at 17 feet high. Even my room has 4 large windows that luckily fit blinds, but most of our windows are too large for blinds or curtains. Which means, basically, Everyone can see right into our house, whether they're in our front yard, backyard, or in their boat, etc. It really doesn't matter though, because they definitely can see into a big portion of the house, and the house itself is huge. There are 8 doors that I constantly check to make sure they're locked. I have 2 dogs, one of them being an English bulldog. And a week ago, I got home and I found a framed art print of a bulldog with saran wrap wrapped around it. There was no note and no context to it, so we have no idea who left it. I'm an artist though, and I often share pictures of my bulldog, so I feel that it's probably aimed towards me. We asked all of our friends, family, and even neighbours, but nobody knows who left it. Tonight though, I finished some assignments and I immediately laid down in bed. After about 20 minutes, I heard knocks on my window. My dog was in the hallway and started barking as soon as it happened. After laying down for like 10 minutes frozen in fear, I got up to try and see if there was something or someone out there lurking in the dark. There wasn't, from what I could tell. This all happened tonight, and I'm still laying here scared. The cops take so long to get out here and would probably get lost again, and my anxiety is so high, I guess from my past experiences. I've called my older brother and I've messaged friends to let them know what's going on. All 8 doors are locked and I triple-checked them as well. I know it all sounds a bit silly writing it out, but the feeling of being watched is just really, really scary. I just want to start this off by saying that this is 100% true and has taken course for the last 3 years of my life until it finally ended last month. Some parts of the story may be left out due to how long this actually has been happening, or that certain parts may go against the rules of this community, or I didn't see that part as really significant to the story as a whole. If I somehow miss something that's important to the story, please comment your question below and I'll try and reply to it. So this all started back in the summer of 2017. My friend Aurora had just finished high school and I was celebrating going into my senior year with only 1 semester of classes left and a backpacking trip planned to the other semester. We decided to go out and celebrate this big milestone and go to a party. We also knew a few people at this party. Daniel was someone that we'd partied with before and had introduced us to some of his other friends, so we felt pretty comfortable with this crowd of people. And that was until the owner of the residence that this party was being held at made his way over to us. Now, I feel like I need to explain Clark a little bit. Clark was a high school dropout that just honestly loved to party. His crowd of people grew out of the house party scene long ago, and ever since then, he would just merge himself into the younger crowds of party scenes and replace them with an even younger crowd when they grew out of it as well. This group of people was his third group that he hosted parties for, and they were starting to grow out of it as well. Anyway, Clark made his way over to us and introduced himself. Me and Aurora hit it off with him at first, as he showed us all the cool party tricks that we had never heard of before. But as the night went on, Aurora and me got even more drunk, and the mood of Clark just kind of shifted. He kept going up to my friend and practically dragging her to any secluded place that he could. She got frustrated with him and plainly told him that she was seeing someone she really cared about and didn't want to do anything with him. Clark didn't get mad. He simply took 2 steps over to where I was and started doing the same with me. I wasn't seeing anyone at the time and was also so stupid drunk that I couldn't even think of making up a fake boyfriend at the time. So every time that he would ask me to sneak away, I didn't have a better answer than I don't want to. After a while, this visibly upset Clark until he lit up from an idea that he had. He starts yelling, "Field trip," to the rest of the party and insisting that we follow him to this mysterious new location. I was all for it until I saw where exactly it was. It was a giant cemetery that stretched for miles, literally just across the road from this place. Red flags start going off in my head because it's 2 a.m. and the only visible spots in the cemetery were the paths that had the streetlights. Everywhere else was covered in trees and just simply too dark to see anything. I go up to Aurora and ask her if it'd be okay if we just kind of left at this point. She was too busy taking care of Daniel, the guy who invited us and introduced us to this scene of people, because he had drank too much and couldn't get off the toilet. I chug a good chunk of tequila and I decide, well, what the hell. Then I make my way with the rest of the party to the cemetery. Everything was fine for the first 5 minutes of the walk, but as we went deeper in, I kind of noticed that Clark had made his way right next to me. My plan was to just keep walking with the group, until he wraps his arms around mine in a very aggressive way that makes it so that I can't get away, and then drags me deep into the darkness of the cemetery. I can't even see a foot in front of me, and I look back to try and see if the party would maybe still see us, but definitely not. I could barely hear them yelling anymore, and when the reality of the situation hits, simultaneously, I trip and fall. Looking around to see what I tripped on, I find nothing but Clark's foot. And also, now Clark trying to lay down to play off him tripping me as me being clumsy and making us both fall. I'm starting to freak out, taking in everything that could help me get out of this situation, when I start hearing Aurora screaming my name. I don't even take a second to look or even to talk to him. I just get up and start sprinting towards the sound of her screams. When I catch up with her, I tell her what happened, and we decide to leave without saying goodbye to anyone but Daniel. Fast forward a couple of months. I haven't talked to Clark since, but Aurora keeps sending me messages through the grapevine that he's sorry and won't ever try anything like that again, and that he genuinely just wants to be friends, and I usually would have just ignored it, but our good friend Daniel had just passed away. Something about being in a stolen car with a gun and the cops fired back. I don't know. There was only one article about it, so I don't know what happened really. And I knew that Clark was just as close to Daniel as me and Aurora were, so I decided to message him and tell him that if he needed anyone to talk to during this time of grieving, that I'd be willing to listen. It didn't even take him more than an hour to respond back, saying that he was in a really dark place that day and needed someone to talk to that night. So I gathered up some stuff and texted him my address and headed out when he was there. Now, I don't really want to get into too much detail about the next part, but all you really need to know about this encounter to understand the story better is that he took my bubbler and vape as a reminder to himself about what he did to me on this night. He also forced my eyes open the entire time so that he could stare at me and say things like, "I've never seen someone as beautiful as you, your eyes are just amazing," and so on and so forth. Basically, I knew not to mess with Clark anymore, and I didn't report it because at the time I was sneaking out and didn't want my parents to know that I did, so I just kind of kept it hush-hush. Plus, I couldn't get pregnant, and I could just get an STD screening at the doctor's the next day without my parents finding out anyway. Fast forward a couple more months, I blocked Clark on everything, and so did Aurora. She had also moved into a new apartment with her boyfriend, and I had started my new job just down the street, while finishing my last semester of high school and getting ready for my backpacking trip. Everything was going smoothly, until Clark came into my work one night. As soon as he saw me at the door, his eyes pretty much never left me. He kept trying to talk to me, and it got to the point where I just broke down and I had a panic attack because of emotions that I'd bottled up and frankly didn't even know existed. My manager had to ban him from the property, and I ended up quitting anyway because he knew where I work now and would just stay in the parking lot watching me because he knew that he wasn't allowed in. I just focused on my backpacking for the following months, and when I finally got back into town, I found a job 3 towns away and started working there, hoping that enough time had passed where he wouldn't be looking for me anymore and I could just start work again. But that just wasn't the case. No matter how far away my job would be, he would just somehow always find me and find a way to get there. I was fed up, and I told my parents at this point, and they helped me to get a restraining order. It worked for a little while, but some of you might be remembering something that I didn't at the time. He knew my address. So I was out of high school and done with my backpacking adventures and just focused on getting enough money to get my own place and start my career somewhere. But whenever I was home alone nowadays, the house always seemed louder than usual. It never really hit me as anything to worry about.
Until one day I was taking a shower, and the door that led to the hallway kept creaking and bumping like somebody was standing right outside of it. I decided to look under the door to see if I could see any feet or just literally anything to explain what I was hearing. What I saw was much more than anything I could have imagined seeing. One eye looked back at me in the same green-brown hue of the eye that had haunted me for years. Clark didn't seem to know that I had noticed him. He thought that I was just looking around the room, so I decided to take this opportunity to grab my phone and hit record. Trying to time it perfectly, I wait for the next creak of the door, and then I whip around the corner, phone in hand, and try to zoom in on the eye under the door. He now realizes that I'm recording him and shoots his head straight up out of view. I run over to the door and lock it, while I then go back to the shower, draw the curtain, and dial 911. I don't say anything because Clark would hear it. Rather, I just wait until they hear the knock on my door because they already had my address on file. It seems like hours before they show up, but as soon as they do, I get out and wrap a towel around me as fast as I can. While I'm doing this, I hear the distinct sound of feet walking away from the door and going somewhere. Not downstairs, but upstairs. I don't care at this point though, because I know that he's here and I'm determined to have this all sorted once and for all. I let the police in and tell them the situation and where I'd heard him walk off to. It only takes 10 minutes for them to find him under the guest bed. And after some digging around, they tell me that he's been getting in through a small window in a part of our house that isn't used that much. Clark's now being held in jail while we figure out what charges to file. I told the police about what he did to me that summer, and since he's 26 now and I'm only 20, they don't even need to hear what he did to me. The age difference and the time frame is enough apparently. But after all these years, this, thankfully, might finally be the end of it. I was driving late at night on I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula MT. I'm originally from Seattle. I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along the side, occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night and I'm on my way to my hotel when I notice that I need to get some gas for my car. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump, and it had a convenience store attached to it, but it was also closed. And it was at this stage that I get this really weird vibe from the gas station as soon as I pulled up to the pump, in fact. I hadn't turned off my car yet. I just put it into park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut it off too when, out of the corner of my eye, I see some dark figure come up from the side of the closed convenience store and start running towards my car. Some instinct in my head kicks in, and I put my car back into drive and got the hell out of there, and I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing after my car for a few seconds. And by that time, I make the turn that gets me back onto the freeway. I found a brightly lit truck stop about 10 miles down the road where I filled up my car eventually. Needless to say, though, that weirded me the hell out for the rest of my drive.